hit a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak. 4, 3, 2, 1. Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing.
Welcome to space.
Hello and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we take you through all the mistakes, failures, and explosions that made space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn,
Chris.
Other Chris.
And today we are joined by a special guest to talk about OTRAG, the first private rocket company, and all of the Nazis and dictators who signed on to help it. So Nate Bethea is a producer and co-host of the Trash Future and What a Hell of a Way to Die podcasts, as well as the producer for Lions Led by Donkeys and Kill James Bond podcasts. Nate, thank you for coming on our show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'll be completely honest. I got the idea to invite you on for this one because I remember while listening to Lions Led by Donkeys, there's been the recent jags in a bunch of episodes about Muammar Gaddafi always being involved with everything.
Correct, yeah.
You mentioned Mobutu Sese Seko in a recent one, and I thought, hey, I vaguely remember a rocket story.
Yeah, the Zairian space program in the 70s, I think, and it's like...
Oh, sweet. So you do know about this one.
I don't know the details, but it's kind of like one of the things where you hear these stories and it's like invariably there's, Swiss and Austrian and German engineers involved. And that's probably the 70s version of the guy hired to work on NEOM. Like, this could be a thing that gives you a lot of money, but also like the risk of ending up in a suitcase is always there. Which is not to say that Mobutu and Mohammed bin Salman are the same, but rather that like when you cashed up dictator is like, hey, do this vanity project for me. Like, you kind of hope it goes passably well. Yeah. And sadly, if I remember correctly, Zaire did not do particularly well in the space race. But I promise all the details are going to come as a surprise to me. I genuinely do. I just know that they tried. I knew there was it was like in like the late 70s, I think there was a Zairian space program before Zaire became the DRC after Mobutu died.
Yeah, and this is another one of those kind of stories I've talked about to our listeners on the show before. It starts off with a fun topic, and then as I delve into it more and more and more and research it, it just gets stupider and stupider. So, we're definitely going to be talking about the Zairian Space Agency. And another thing to kind of talk about this is that this is also, OTRAG is the first real private space company out there.
Okay.
A lot of companies before this have built rockets. They have built components. This is the first one that truly goes out of their way to they will launch a satellite for you, start to finish. They're not going to hand it off to NASA or West Germany or anyone.
Just hand them a payload and it's off. That kind of thing.
And yeah, exactly. And this is actually going to be part one of our 2-part series on OTRAG. As far as sources, I'll mostly be drawing from an English translation by Joachim Kerr of an article by Bernd Leitenberger, as well as the books Great Mambo Chicken and the Transhuman Condition and Projet Wotan, which I had to read in French, so all of you listeners had better appreciate that. All links will be in the show notes.
Oh.
And this is also going to be nice because having someone here who can actually correct me on my horrible pronunciations of all of these German words.
Sake. This is the same thing that with Joe. It's rarely do I take the time and effort to punch in, but the ones that always get me are when he's doing medieval history about the English. And it's like, Joe, there's a Gloucester in Massachusetts. There is no excuse for calling it Gloucester. The French ones I've given up on, quite frankly. And German, look, I'll be honest with you. German, I spoke German as a kid before because my dad was stationed there, so I lived there. Otherwise, I understand, it's not intuitive how things are said. So if it feels necessary, I'll do it. But I'm not going to be a jerk about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, and but for the record, it's Agincourt, not Agincourt. Come on, for fuck's sake, man.
Wait, did you call it Agincourt at one point?
Agincourt. Oh, it was Agincourt the whole time. Oh, believe me.
Oh no.
So whenever you're editing an episode that you are not on, Is that just like water torture?
No, I mean, not really. Like we have obviously like now I'm one of the co-hosts on Lions as well. And so like I'm basically on most of them. But even before then, because I've been editing that show for 5 years now. It's just more like, I mean, it's fun. Like it doesn't really bother me. Like it's one of those things where with Joe, we try to make the effort so that it doesn't come across as like super unprofessional. But sometimes like it's going to be a challenge and it's not going to be perfect. But like I think the one that gets me is more often than not, like this is not to brag on my Trash Future host, but
no, we're getting a Nate derail on our episode. This is the coolest thing. I edit
TF, and a lot of times it talks about America, and I'm not on the episode, and I'm the only American in the show, and I'm just like, stop, this is not what it's like in America, like please. But it's like, do I want to put in the effort to be there? Because then I have to edit myself as well as other people. So yeah, you asked the question, so they're it's not a derail if you prompted it, right?
That is fair, yes.
The origins of Lutz Kayser.
And this is one of the things that I hope I am pronouncing right, because I'm going to have to say this name like 100 times.
Lutz Thilo Ferdinand Kayser. Yeah, that would probably be Kayser, yeah. With German
Kayser.
aerospace engineer who died in 2017. OTRAG. Yep. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, Kayser. Yeah, that's, yeah. I was like, Kayser sounds like how somebody from Indiana pronounces Kaiser, but in this case, AY, you're correct, I think.
Yeah, I didn't want to call him Kaiser the whole time if that wasn't the right way to do it. But
I don't know. I mean, because she's from Stuttgart, so like he's Schwäbisch, and like that literally might be Kaiser, but I don't know. I think we can be forgiven. We can get a dispensation on German last name pronunciation here. Martin Luther is saying, actually, why the fuck are you asking me for a dispensation? I hate that shit, but I will grant it to you for this specific one.
So yeah, we have that out of the way. We are done and clear on mispronouncing this dude's name. And furthermore, he's a piece of shit. So I don't care if I do wind up mispronouncing his name. Good.
Just laughs back to Kaiser at some point.
Yeah. So the hero of our story, Lutz Kayser, was born in Stuttgart, Germany in March of 1939. Now, both because of his relative obscurity and because of that whole world war that kicked off before his first birthday, we don't really know a whole lot about Kayser's early childhood. He stayed in or around Stuttgart, eventually studying aerospace engineering at Stuttgart University in 1954, where he basically earned the equivalent of a master's degree. He was particularly interested in rocketry, which he expressed by creating one of the first student rocketry associations in West Germany. So apologies in advance. The Arbeitsgemeinschaft für Raketentechnik Raumfahrt an der Universität Stuttgart, or the Working Group for Rocket Technology and Space Travel at the University of Stuttgart.
That wasn't bad, dude. That genuinely wasn't bad. I mean, like, yeah, that's not. I thought you were gonna be like, oh, I can't pronounce like Strasse or something like that. But no, that's not an easy one. So no, well
there
done
have been worse German readings.
It is several hours of practice right there, finally paying off.
Yeah, well, yeah. I actually lived in Stuttgart as well as a kid. Like I lived near Stuttgart, so I actually do know the area. So yeah, like. I don't really think I can give any great insight on it other than the fact that like there's just a lot of, it's not as industrialized as the areas like in the Ruhr Valley, but like a lot of the German auto industry is there. So one presumes, technical colleges, things along those lines, certainly in that era, in the sort of what they call Wirtschaftswunder, like economic miracle era, like if you wanted to do a technical job and you had the ability, like you could find work and, educational opportunities and stuff.
Okay, so that might actually tie in. You might have some insight to give in just a second, because so he starts this this rocket club, and this is basically one of the first in West Germany. This is like West Germany's first attempt to get back into rocketry after all of their best and most Nazi scientists got stolen by the everybody else, the Allies.
The scramble for our scientists are better than your scientists.
Yeah. So together with some other students, Kayser built a 5-foot-tall test stand for rockets on the property of his father's company, Südzucker AG. Now, I don't really know the market penetration they have in North America, but if you've ever heard that name before, it's because Südzucker AG is literally the world's largest sugar producer.
I was going to say, that sounds like Southern Sugar. Yeah. That's what I would guess the name means. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kayser's dad was its director. So he's got like massive financial support. His family is incredibly wealthy. And he is leveraging that to, get his dad to pay for and build, all of these rocket launch sites on this company property.
So he's doing hobby rocketry, except big. Like not like the engine thing that you put, like, you know, the little firework thing for mini
little
hobby
ST's
rockets.
rocket,
Yeah. No, he's doing like way bigger stuff. Okay. All right.
No, this is you're going miles up, and there's a good chance it's landing in someone's backyard traumatically.
And then your dad, someone who's like making minimum wage working for your dad, is going to have to go out and fix it for you.
It's weird because, like, I think outside of Germany, people have this impression of the country as being extremely uptight. And it's like, I think if people have a weird hobby they're really into, that's kind of indulged to some extent. So like a guy really being into rockets in the 1950s is, I can recall being like, there were like adult RC car clubs as a kid in Germany. And it was like, no, this isn't racing cars like for kids for play. Like, no, like this is what guys like. The joke we have on Lines Led by Donkeys is that every German guy comes home from being a bus driver and either plays Bus Driver Simulator on the computer or goes to like the world's hardest fetish club. And it's like, there's a kind of like compartmentalized, really into like hobby thing there. And so in a way, I'm sort of like, well, yeah, having a building as accurate as one possibly can, model rockets that are actually just regular rockets, but slightly smaller. That does seem pretty German.
Yeah. I'm kind of like prejudging this by knowing how much of a piece of shit he's going to turn into. If this guy were cool, I would be so in favor of everything he's doing.
Wasn't it like a British guy or a Canadian guy who was going to build like the world's largest gun for Saddam Hussein?
Oh, Gerald Bull.
And it's one of those things where it's like, if that guy, like in the, you know, he's like, oh, he was really into like sports shooting when he was a teenager. Like, yeah, you would take that story when covering it and be like, God, what a piece of shit. Like this led him to do this thing, you know, whereas like if it was just a benign thing, it wouldn't matter. So
it is a fair point you bring up about this kind of club and hobby aspect in Germany. This isn't entirely unique to Germany, but like Werner von Braun, all these guys, they get their start at university rocket clubs. Eventually, the government and later the Nazis take over and kind of expand and bring into the weapons aspect.
Gotcha.
But anyway, Kayser and the other students were not alone in playing with rockets. The club was able to recruit a prominent rocket scientist as their technical advisor, Irene Sanger-Brett. Now, like a lot of German rocket scientists, Irene had worked for the Nazis, developing new weapons along with her husband, Eugen Sanger.
It's never just a single person. It's always a couple.
And this is actually interesting because Irene and Eugen formed, is it Eugen or Eugen?
I would say Eugen.
Eugen?
Because EU in Germany, it'd be Eugen, yeah. Eugen Sanger, yeah. But I mean, who knows, honestly. For a second, I thought you were saying Jürgen, like Jürgen, but you like dropping the R out. But I was like, you know what? It's a free-for-all. Yeah. It's absolutely total chaos when it comes to, yeah, I'd say Eugen.
Before you drop that, Nate, I got a little brain worm telling me, like, what if it's Eugen?
Yeah, exactly.
There it
exactly.
is.
Yeah.
We probably shouldn't put too much respect on that name, considering
no. We're gonna hear about him. I'm just about to get to him, and he's evil and wild.
Oh, so he's that special kind of psychotic.
See, I was thinking it was going to be like, oh, this guy, like, yeah, he worked for the Nazis, but also like he kind of had no choice because like literally that was the only way he could have a job. And it's always like, no, this guy's really into this shit. Like he's really into doing the worst thing possible. It's just like, man.
Do you want to guess when he joins the SS?
Pre-war, absolutely.
I would say, yeah, it's got to be either like 1937 or like literally 1945. He's like, no, I'm still into it. I finally get my chance.
Irene and Eugen join in 1932. They are diehards.
They're unapologetic.
Irene and Eugen formed basically a rocketry, like they formed a power couple. They worked together on all their designs, and even if Eugen wound up with more of kind of the credit of the two, I want to make sure Irene gets her fair share of, you know, both the credit and the blame.
Hell yeah.
So these two were a power couple, but they were also on the more eccentric side of German rocket science. Here's an example. In the late 30s, before World War II had even started, the Sangers started working on their most famous rocket project, the Silbervogel or Silver Bird. So if you've ever seen pictures of like German wonder weapons...
This fucking thing, okay.
Yeah, I guarantee you've seen pictures of this. This was a hypersonic suborbital rocket-propelled space bomber specifically designed to bomb America. So the way that this would work is it'd be fired from a rocket sled at around Mach 1.5. It'd speed up to the edge of space, coast at a nice 22,000 kilometers per hour, and then bomb the US and then land somewhere in Japanese waters.
Another thing was it was supposed to be a skip glider too.
Yeah.
Which is something that kind of would have doomed it ultimately in the end, funny enough, because it just would have plowed right through the atmosphere and they would have melted.
Hold that thought.
Oh,
This is so basically like we're just getting like the alternate version first draft of Gravity's Rainbow that ends in Central Africa.
Effectively, yeah.
This is all starting to seem really familiar. Like if you were like, oh yeah, and by the way, like Eugen Sanger like actually served in the German Navy on the toilet ship called the Rücksichtslos, and like it's the ship that's just nothing but bathrooms. I'd be like, yeah, that's
Oh my
normal.
God,
That's Germany. Yeah.
yeah, that's where I knew that last name from.
From Gravity's Rainbow. Yeah, it's weird. It's like Gravity's Rainbow is one of those books where it's like I can't really tell you a lot of any of the details of the plot because it's all remembered in broad strokes, but certain things like names, songs, a boat that's an armada of ships where there's just one bathroom ship for the whole armada. Like, yeah, I do remember that. So, and then you start throwing in, rocketry, the German language.
It gets weird.
This all just feels familiar. Yeah.
And something to bring up is that the Silbervogel is widely associated with this period in like 1944-45 where the Germans are just approving and putting out as many dumb prototypes as possible. But what a lot of people don't know is that this design predated the war. Like this is the level of crazy that the Sangers are on is that they are designing insane German prototypes even while like nobody else is that desperate. For the first few years of the war, the Sangers had worked on their rocket bomber on the side, and they pitched it to the Luftwaffe every now and then, who in turn ignored them because they were insane. But they got their big break in 1942 when the Ministry of Aviation started a competition for the America Bomber Project. So, as you can probably guess, this is a competition to give the Luftwaffe a heavy bomber that could reach New York, bomb it, and return in one round trip, something that they had never really had at any point in the war. They just kind of had medium bombers and nothing better.
Because the Germans making anything with more than 2 engines during that war was always kind of a cursed effort.
Well, hold on, because this one doesn't have more than 2 props.
It's rocket.
Yeah, every other entry for the America bomber was basically what the Allies were using, so big propeller-driven bombers. The Sanger's entry was their sci-fi Mach 17 rocket bomber. Now, unfortunately, in 1942, the Nazis weren't quite desperate enough to order Sanger's wonder weapon. The couple went back to their labs to fiddle with the design until 1944, when every Nazi was just as crazy and desperate as them. So there was an episode about it for Lines Led by Donkeys, I think in the last few months, but this is the Jägernaut program, or the Emergency Fighter Program. And if you think of like desperate Nazi wonder weapons, this is that period. This is where the Nazis are, it's either a load of designs that only existed on paper, and any of the ones that actually flew murdered their pilots in horrible ways.
Yeah.
So this is like the Comet.
Yeah, the one that was made out of balsa wood or whatever.
The
one that
HE-162. Yeah,
I can't remember. Yeah. There was. I'll be honest with you. Like aviation stuff outside of the things that was knocked into my head in the Army is my knowledge is not great on details. But we did an episode about a late stage of the war prototype bomber that was effectively made. It was made out of balsa wood and glue, or some kind of wood, like MDF style wood and glue, because they didn't have the materials to make things out of metal, and they kept putting like cadets and teenagers in it, and it killed you. Like it was just it was the plane that killed you basically at this point, but not even in like a kamikaze way, just like it like the wings fell off.
In a shitty backyard, we glue this thing together. You can't eject because the engine's right behind you. Good luck.
When we were talking about that hobby stuff, like those teenagers got to experience the kind of model rockets that I built as a kid, except scaled up, and they were sitting inside them. So they just crumpled and crashed.
The only thing Zoomers have an equivalent is to get on one of those rental electric scooters in any major city, which is basically like trying to fly to transatlantic in a balsa wood plane you built in your garage.
Just step on a rental scooter, peg the throttle.
Just as liable to burst into flames. Yeah,
apparently, yeah.
Just take it the wrong way down the sidewalk. Wait for someone to step in your way.
It's funny because the teens in London have figured out a way to crack the Uber bikes, the Lime bikes, and basically like they whatever it is that they do manages to make it so the bikes run without limiting you by distance, and also you don't have to pay, but it constantly makes this clicking noise because it's trying to re-engage something. And now people are like losing their minds complaining about it. And it's like, this is a country where you put up speakers that emit a high pitch frequency that only teens can hear to drive them away. They finally found a way to get revenge.
Immediately running to the government, like, you need to stop this.
They wouldn't have to have an emergency fighter program to be like, oh, we need to put our teenage kids in balsa wood projects that immediately crash. Like, so in a way, it's like I'm not handing it to the Nazi couple you're talking about, the Sangers, but like what I'm saying is that they were at least doing this things like you said, Jägernaut, like fighter emergency. They
were always insane.
They were trying to solve a problem. If they'd solved the problem, that would have sucked more for humanity, but they were trying to solve a problem with whatever they had, as opposed to
they would have solved the problem, and then your production line is still getting bombed by the British during the night, the Americans during the day.
Yeah. It's very funny. I was thinking about this because the town I actually lived, like I said, I lived near Stuttgart as a kid, but I lived near actually the city of Pforzheim, which is like a kind of a smaller city in the kind of greater Stuttgart area. And there's I've told this, I can never remember the date, but it was sometime I believe in February 1945, and basically, I always give this example of like what the Allied bombing campaign was like, because there's a monument like something like 20 Februarplatz or something like that in Pforzheim, because the entire town was wiped. Every single building in Pforzheim was leveled in one night. Like, that's just so, as you were saying, it's like, yeah, you can make up for equipment and assembly line shortages or material shortages, but it's like you are still being periodic, like any target that appears on the radar and or maps of the Allies is just going to get hit with such an incomprehensible amount. I was gonna say inhumane, but like, nah, fuck off. Incomprehensible amount of munitions that it's like, well, are you building them underground? Are you building them? Are they piecework? People are putting them together in their kitchens. Otherwise, like, it's probably not going to last.
And the actual answer to that is that the Nazis did build a lot of them underground, and they did use slave labor, but that's something for future episodes of horrible stories.
Sigh. There I was trying to use hyperbole, and I forget you can't. Not with these guys.
Yeah, this is the Nazis we're talking about, and they are beyond hyperbole. They have done everything and anything.
Don't worry. They go underground. They get hit by Grand Slam or Cloudmaker. So,
but yeah, to get back to the Jägernaut program, whenever this starts, the Sangers actually already have a couple of designs worked up because they have always been on this level. So the first one that they get approved, quote unquote, because this thing never flies, is the P-14 Ramjet Interceptor. And this is basically a V-1 like cruise missile with a person on it. And this is their contribution. And thankfully, like almost every other German emergency fighter, it never flew. And if it did, it almost certainly would have killed more of its pilots than Allies.
One of the critics mentioned Gravity's Rainbow. They'd read it, and it's like, isn't that just the Schwarzgerät? Isn't that the whole thing? They're like, oh, they must have this secret control system. It's like, no, they just put the 16-year-old, very unfortunate teen boy in there to fucking pilot it. I didn't know that was real. I thought that was fucking Thomas Pynchon just like really making stuff like going nuts, because I don't believe the German Navy had a ship that was just toilets. So it's fair to assume that the other rocket related things were also made up. But no, you're saying this thing is real.
So in complete fairness, this thing would have guns on it. It was meant to like fly up and shoot down bombers. It wasn't just a manned cruise missile. In fairness, they did design a manned cruise missile, except the kid was supposed to be able to bail out.
Gotcha.
I have a feeling there are a lot of air quotes around it, supposed to be able to bail out.
By bail out, we mean he's going to be turned into meatball
into a
material.
slurry that you have bail out with a bucket. Yeah, exactly.
I almost respect Japan more because they just said, like, yeah, there's no way you're getting out of this.
You're just going to die, but it's good.
As opposed to Germany telling these kids, like, oh, yeah, just dodge roll at the last second. You'll be fine. You'll get your iframes.
Fuck. At least, what is it? Japan decided, okay, we're going to try to be chads about it. At one point, you had, the divers with, like, beer kegs full of explosives just poking the bottoms of the landing craft?
Various methods of creating human-born explosive devices.
In the end, we're meant to just poke things with a stick. The contents of that stick are just variable.
The P-14, it doesn't fly. The Sangers, they ride out the war. They survive. And after the war, you'd expect that the Sangers would have been grabbed up by either the Americans or the Soviets, who were, busy hoovering up every other promising Nazi scientist they could find. Unfortunately for them, the Allies also thought that the Sangers were nuts, and only France was willing to give them a shot in what was basically like being the last kid picked for gym dodgeball. France was left to just I guess we'll take the insane ones.
Judging by what France did to cats, I wouldn't be too enthused about getting into their rocket program.
Guess who's partially responsible for that?
Oh, no.
So the Sangers spent the years after the war working for the French government and founding the Astronautical Federation, which would become one of France's dozens of different competing space programs. They also officially got married in 1951, and then Stalin tried to have them kidnapped.
What did he want to do with them?
Bomber stuff. So remember how I said that the Soviets thought that the Sangers weren't worth recruiting? By that, I meant that Soviet rocket scientists like Sergei Korolev and Boris Chertok thought they were insane. What I didn't mean was Joseph Stalin, who in 1946 found a drawing of their design and decided that it was the coolest thing he'd ever seen.
Oh god, he was getting rocket pilled by proxy. No.
It's the opposite of Khrushchev. So Khrushchev gets like rocket pilled by Korolev. Stalin actually hates Korolev. Stalin has Korolev and all of the other rocket scientists sent to a gulag. And whenever these captured drawings for the Silbervogel land on his desk, he wants this. This is his super weapon. And obviously he can't trust any of like Korolev with this because they're so addicted to like ballistic missiles. He goes to a man named Mstislav Keldysh, a famous rocket scientist, and he asks him to copy the Sanger's design. The only problem is Keldysh is actually a good mathematician, and when he examined the captured Silbervogel notes, he found basic math problems that the Sangers had made that meant that if it ever flew, it would burn up in the atmosphere before ever reaching America. Yes! So the program is just like fatally flawed, even from the drawing board.
I love thinking about the Nazi war machine as just to compare it, it's like how we're like capitalism is like the orphan crushing machine, but the Nazi war machine is like the teenager incinerator.
Yes.
Also, just like you said, too crazy for Operation Paperclip, but I didn't realize it was also too bad at math. Like, yeah. This is just very funny. It's like, oh yeah, we you were in the running to be recruited to be one of our, sort of like you said, hoovered up experts.
But you failed Calc 1. Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, but then actually we realized like what you're just doing is basically drawing fan art of like mecha, what was it called? Magitech armor from Final Fantasy VI. Like it's not actually rocketry. Like you don't know anything about it.
Here's the thing. Keldysh makes this very long report. He fully lays out why this plan is stupid, and he brings it to Stalin, and Stalin doesn't believe him. Because Stalin has fully bought into the idea that German rocket scientists are the best in the world, and clearly Keldysh is just too stupid to understand this super weapon.
I'm just imagining if Stalin had lived longer, and he's like, well, Comrade Stalin, I regret to inform you that the Germans do not, in fact, have a weirdly dog-like giant flying dragon that transports a small boy around. That's just a movie. They haven't actually invented that, but Stalin doesn't believe in CGI. And he's like, no, this never-ending story, we're gonna kidnap it.
This is real.
Yeah, so he decides, if his rocket scientists are clearly too stupid to do this, he needs to get the Sangers. So he's going to go and kidnap them. And this is actually a real possibility, like, because this is the Soviet Union we're talking about. They have armies of dudes specially trained in blackbagging people. In fact, Werner von Braun and the other Operation Paperclip scientists were almost kidnapped by Soviet agents before they could even reach the US. They have the means. Stalin, he has the NKVD assemble a team of their top men for this job. He also assigned them a rocket scientist, Grigory Tokaty, to help them track down the Sangers. And then, for reasons unknown, he assigns his son, Vasily Stalin, a notorious drunken fuck-up, to lead the whole team.
One presumes that since you're introducing them now for a story that I believe reaches its sort of apex, to use the rocket metaphor, in the late 70s, Vasily Stalin does not succeed in what's it called, in kidnapping these people.
Yeah, I feel like Vasily being a huge fuck up, I think he's just going to stay par for the course and continue being a huge fuck up.
Yes, but the way it happens is pretty fun. Yeah, like you said, this plan does not work. Like, first off, they have no clue where the Sangers are. So Vasily drags them to Berlin, then Vienna, then all around Europe before eventually someone tells him, like, no, they're in Paris. I should clarify, the team knows that the Sangers are in Paris. Vasily does not trust them. So he goes on a European road trip. Then, while the trained NKVD guys are like, they're set up in a house across the street from the Sangers getting ready to abduct them, Vasily goes, knocks on their door, and it just tells them, hi, I'm Vasily Stalin. Have you ever heard of this wonderful thing called the Soviet Union? And they immediately, like, kick him out.
Jesus Christ. Dude rolled charisma 1.
Yeah, he just goes up to them and just does the whole, like, does this rag smell like chloroform to you? What this starts is a period of like days and weeks where the son of Joseph Stalin just stalks these German people around Paris, trying to convince them like, no, please come work in the middle of a Kazakh desert. It'll be cool.
We absolutely can build Magitech armor there.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the Soviet Union honestly believes that we can find an Esper buried in the mountains somewhere in one of the Central Asian SSRs. So like, honest, we're going to make your dreams reality. Don't ask what happened to the last person who was unable to make Joseph Stalin's dream a reality.
As this is going on, like the NKVD professionals are begging Vasily to let them do their jobs, and he responds by threatening to have them killed. And then things get even dumber. Quote, the planned kidnap attempt by the Soviet secret police team was also botched by a Soviet aircraft engineer named Tokayev, who had knowledge of the operation, defected to Britain, and blew the whistle on their plans. The Russian engineer even went as far as to have an article on the planned kidnapping published in the British Daily Express newspaper. French secret police thwarted subsequent attempts to remove the German couple. The Russian snatch squad was forced to leave France empty-handed, and the Silbervogel never flew with a red star. Tragically.
So tragically. God.
I like the idea that Vasily just gave them a postcard for like Turatam, Kazakhstan, and it's got like some guys with their shirts off, like poking scorpions to make them fight each other.
This could be you. You just got to sign up.
And Nate, for context, where the Soviets were doing their rocket test, Turatam, Baikonur is just the worst place on the planet. People got weird sicknesses that mimicked radiation poisoning, and it took them forever to figure out why. Like, it's just not a fun place to be.
You know what's funny as a side note is there's kind of a comparable experience in the early days of the U.S. war in Afghanistan. There was a base called K2 or Karshi-Khanabad in Uzbekistan. And I don't know if this was disclosed and just ignored or not disclosed, but it was basically a tent city and then an airfield built on the site of a former Soviet and then subsequent Uzbek army NBC decon site. And basically every single person who was stationed there got cancer. It's like the American version of the set of the, what is it, Andrei Tarkovsky film Stalker. Like literally everyone got cancer from it. Like it's,
oh my God.
So it just seems like something about whether it's military actions and or just whatever in Central Asia. It's like when you're doing something with heavy industry in the Soviet Union, like there's just like the building that gives you cancer, and that's part and parcel of your job.
There's also, on a slight side note, same thing with, lakes drying up in Russia. I think it's Lake Karachi or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it is just jam-packed full of anthrax, and anthrax does not die. So anytime that lake dries up and wind blows, someone's having a bad time somewhere downwind.
And that's also what the Aral Sea, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it's the Aral Sea. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's but I'm sure it's not the only one, but the Aral Sea is one of them where they diverted the Sirdarya and Amudarya to do, irrigation for cotton in, I believe, Uzbekistan.
Because some Soviet minister absolutely hated the existence of the Ural Sea, said it was a mistake, and just started diverting everything.
Yeah, and famously, if like the only country on Earth with less efficient water transmission lines than the Soviet Union is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and so as a result, like almost all of this water is lost. So much is lost even before it reaches fields, and as a result, like I think the Kazakhs, if I'm remembering correctly, it's the Aral Sea basically is split between two countries, and one side has created a dam and has helped to restore it. The other side has not because they can't afford to, and it's basically just disappeared.
The way I heard it is they left one side to just die off because, okay, we can save this side.
We can save this one, yeah.
They ended up reclaiming, like thousands of square kilometers of lake bed, and the water's actually coming close to port towns. The other side is just, we divert anything there, it's just going to bleed out.
Yeah, it's just like Mad Max shit. It's just like a dry, complete desert with, salts and heavy metal trace elements that give you cancer, and then also just ships marooned everywhere, just completely rusted out. Like, yeah, it's very, very strange.
Why am I now picturing a British or Soviet politician doing the whole, like, don't be tempted by water speech from a Morton Joe?
Oh, God.
That was basically last summer when it was 42 here. Like, they're not used to hot weather in this country. And yeah.
We could derail more
now,
later.
For the Sangers, with the danger of Vasily Stalin kidnapping them gone, the Sangers continued their work in France until 1954, when they moved back to Stuttgart. So both Eugen and Irene got into the local rocketry business, with Eugen starting up a research lab in the city, while Irene worked at the university and advised Lutz Kayser's new student rocket club. So that's kind of how we circle back. I know that was a bit of a segue, but I thought it would be fun to tell you about the people that Kayser learned from and worked with. So starting in 1954, but going all through his time as a student, Kayser became Eugen Sanger's protege, basically. He helped Sanger design the first German post-war liquid fuel rocket and stood out for being enthusiastic and very resourceful. So resourceful, it got him noticed by the Baden-Württemberg Ministry of Economics. See, the ministry wanted to encourage this new field of rocketry in their state, but most of Germany's rocket talent had either fled or been recruited by other countries. They had a lot of enthusiastic students like Kayser, but basically no one with experience. And there were a lot of experienced guys floating around. Not a lot of people realize this, but like all those scientists who went out, they didn't stay where they were. They're basically free agents. Different companies and different countries were constantly trading these people back and forth. They were headhunting them. And this is where Lutz Kayser comes in. His first official work in the rocket industry isn't as an engineer. He's a headhunter.
Oh, assembling the old boys club for the worst possible reasons.
It's also very funny when you think about, like, could you have picked a worse person to be your mentor in rocketry? It's like, not to disparage the whole thing about those who can't teach, because I'm like, that's a fucking stupid thing to say, but it's just one of these things where it's like, no, it's not that those who can't teach. These people definitely can. It's just what they do sucks.
And what else is leeching in from the sides?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's very, very funny. Like, yeah, this person has basically not been discredited, even though, like, what they actually proposed was not just ridiculous. It was, as you said previously, fundamentally wrong in its basic concepts because of,
it's almost like they didn't even have they were discredited, then rehabilitated. No, they were just stupid all the way through, were thought of as such until today, where they're just a footnote.
Yeah.
They might just not have had anyone better. Like, West Germany at this point has so few rocket scientists that even they have to kind of say, like, all right, we'll take Eugen Sanger back, the guy who has never successfully built and flown a rocket, and we're going to give him a nice university.
It's kind of an American joke, I suppose, but he's sort of the Robbie Mook of rocketry. It's like every single time, it's like, oh, he fucked it up again. It's like, all right, who's going to run our next year's campaign? Robbie Mook.
Just run him again. You surely learned.
Yeah, just do it again. You know, he's learned his lesson. It was a fluke, and it's like it's similarly. Seventh
time's the charm.
Yeah, this guy is in rocket terms. You know, it's just sort of like, this thing is definitely going to explode and kill everyone around it. And they're like, nah, but you know, the guy's got experience.
And then you get your It's Always Sunny title card, and it's just like, he fucks it all up again.
The gang learns about gravity.
So the Ministry of Economics asked Kayser to go to France and recruit an ex-Nazi V2 scientist named Wolfgang Pils. And this guy was actually involved in a project we've talked about before on the show. See, Pils was an engine specialist, and he worked with about 30 other V2 veterans on the French Veronique rocket. So this is the same rocket that launched rats and cybercats and endangered monkeys into space.
God damn it.
Now, I don't have a lot of information on the how, but in 1958, about a year before the first Veronique rocket flew, Kayser convinced Wolfgang Pils to come back to Germany and work with his mentor, Eugen. Some sources say he brought other ex-Nazis back. Some sources say just Pils. I'm going to be running with the just Pils because it's the only one I actually have evidence for. So once back in Germany, Kayser and Pils actually worked together for a while, helping Sanger with his projects and picking the site for the German Aerospace Center's new rocket test site in Lampolzhausen. To truly show just how much of a free agent kind of like people moving around situation this was, after this, Pils goes to Egypt. He loses his job in Germany, and like a bunch of other unemployed German scientists, he goes to work for Nasser, who is building a new rocket program.
Oh, that's going to go so well.
And this is going to be something we're going to talk about in the future, because the Mossad tries to kill a bunch of them and just winds up killing a load of bystanders instead.
It's never happened before. It'll never happen again.
Perfect track record.
Because it's never happened.
So even though he was still a graduate student, Kayser started to tackle bigger and bigger projects, quickly making a name for himself across the space field. From astronautics, quote, Kayser's first major development was a bipropellant satellite attitude control system, later sold to Rocketdyne. He also collaborated with NASA's rocket engine division on the Saturn clustered engine concept. Kayser developed the first ablative combustion chamber for the H-1 engine, later tested in firings at Huntsville. This was a first step towards his concept of parallel clustering of low-cost ablative engines. Further work on the idea was supported by von Braun and financially supported by NASA and the German Ministry of Science Research. Kayser founded Technology Forschung, or TF, as a company spin-off to handle this and other projects. So that was another reason I wanted to get you on for this, because we're talking about another guy who helps make TF.
Technology Forschung. I think Forschung, if I remember correctly, is development or like advancement, if I remember.
Which is just like the dumbest company name you can think of. Just technology advanced tech.
The most vanilla supervillain name that you could possibly think.
It's research. I'm like I said, my German. That's the thing that's great about doing it on Lines Led by Donkeys is that I can confuse Germans as well as irritate them because I don't always know what I'm talking about aside from like saying the word out loud.
I really enjoy you saying advanced tech. There is an MSP in my town called Advanced Tech.
So it's technology advancement or technology research. That basically sounds like not a money laundering front SA or something like that. Like a company that's opened up in like the port of Antwerp or something like that. It's like, please don't look into anything here.
We're going to see what Kayser names his front company money laundering scheme, and it's even dumber than this.
Not a money laundering SMB.
So he's starting to get into the big leagues and actually make some new developments. He even invented his own rocket engine, which he named TIROC, T-I-R-O-C. So officially this stood for Tangential Injection and Rotation Combustion, but to Kayser it just meant tiny rocket. So it was by far, for the time, the world's smallest thruster able to put out decent thrust. So like this is what attitude control rockets, so the Apollo, all of these spacecraft, they use little thrusters to turn and like manage their orientation. A lot of this comes out of his design. So he is, at certain things, he is a good engineer. Now, around this time, something called ELDO is getting off the ground, ELDO, the European Launcher Development Organization. So what this was an attempt by the UK, France, and Germany to take all of their different failed rocket programs and weld them together into a working launcher. I say weld them together because that's literally what they tried to do. The Europa rocket was made up of 3 stages. The first stage was a British Blue Streak rocket, the second stage was a French Veronique rocket, and the third stage was a new West German rocket. So they literally just stack these things together.
It sounds horrifying.
Did it work or not? I don't really know much about it.
Shocker!
Yes. That sucks.
Yeah, the Franken rocket failed. So much and so often that the German government went to Kayser and asked him to investigate. Kayser noticed that every failure seemed to happen at exactly the same time, in the short gap between the second stage shutting down and the third stage starting up. And because he was still a student at Stuttgart University, he had access to a dude named Professor John Argyris. I know what you're thinking. Don't worry, he's not a Nazi. In fact, he fled Stuttgart to get away from the Nazis and came back.
Okay.
Anyway, Argyris was a good guy to talk to because he had just invented FEM. And for those who don't know, FEM, or finite element method, is basically the go-to for structural analysis, fluid dynamics, all of that. I realize I might not be talking to the right crowd here, but any mechanical engineer just jumped out of their seats.
You're bringing back a lot of classes that I've just kind of repressed a little bit.
Maybe this is just your standard procedure for an engineering school at a university, but it's just interesting to me that the guy advising the Rocket Club is basically the Nazis gave him a remit to make paper, like sci-fi paper airplanes, and call them, aircraft that we'll use to win the war. But then also a guy who literally apparently has invented a fundamental element of mechanical engineering is also on faculty there.
And they're both advising the same project. You have the dumbest rocket scientist and the founder of modern mechanical engineering, both. And this is honestly one of the first real uses of FEM, is figuring out what went wrong with this rocket.
Like a side tangent of finite element analysis is that you can find at the core of almost every single project nowadays when it comes to engine design, plane design, because you can functionally create a model of your plane, throw stress at it, and see what dies first. And go, there's your problem.
And I want to clarify, I know it sounds almost fanfic-y, the way that, at this early point in his life, Kayser has already worked with all of these famous, all these famous people. He has worked on this project, he's worked on that project. That is actually how influential he was in West Germany at this point. And with this new software that Argyris has developed, Kayser was able to diagnose the problem with the Europa rocket. Basically, what was happening was that cutting off the second stage caused enough vibrations to snap the third stage in half, and all of its hypergolic fuel mixed together, and then it hypergolically exploded. He also figured out that modifying the rocket to fix the problem would be very expensive, and not long after he filed his report, Germany pulled out of the program, and then, France and the UK couldn't keep it going. So, his findings fully collapsed this program.
I'm left thinking about people being disappointed that the program was canceled, even though it was the right call. It's oh, how dare they be smart and cancel the program because it's going to be too expensive. We should just keep going and wasting even more money on a rocket that doesn't work.
Or 3 rockets in a trench coat, basically. And it's Yeah, but all of this was sort of like a hodgepodge to try to be like, no, we didn't actually waste money with all these other failed rockets.
No, look at our successes. Even though we spent, 5 times the project budget on trying to get this one cursed thing to fly for once.
Yeah, I was going to say, we did find gainful employment for the absolute dumbest Nazi aeronautical engineers. So you know what? Like, who is to say it's a failure?
Stop him from doing something dumb or put him on this project.
Yeah,
he's not going to work for Nasser. We need to keep him here.
Containing idiocy.
I was going to say that I'm envious of this man's ability to be like a useful idiot, right? Like he knows enough to be dangerous, but he's just overall just kind of dumb. And so it's just like, how did he get so successful? Just like barely being able to do basic arithmetic for like 30
it's
years.
Because he doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And we are talking about Eugen here.
He will bullshit his way to success. I mean, that was, I'm pretty sure, half of working with the Nazis.
Well, this is like, maybe this is the thing that no one tells you, is that like, yes, the boomers had it in such a way that like all these people's stories, like, oh, this guy started as a janitor at a recording studio and then they just made him a producer and now he's a successful engineer, music engineer. It's like, but maybe the silent generation was even worse, that like you could literally fail dog shit bad at any job and they're like, make this guy a celebrity in his field, like we need to recruit him. It's like, maybe this was just par for the course if you were born in 1939 in Germany. I mean, like a lot of people that were better at their jobs probably died for reasons we won't talk about. So
maybe the Germans just speed ran their way to that generation.
I have to imagine like the records disappeared. In 1945, if you survived the war and came back to Germany, like you could probably just be whoever you wanted.
Yeah, you could do any job you wanted to. It's like, I'm a ballet dancer now. All your ballet dancers got hit by a V2 that backfired. So you know what? Fucking, I'm the head of ballet in Germany now.
All of our ballerinas were recruited into the Comet pilot program and were melted in their seats.
Their lithe shape allowed them to fit inside the rocket chassis, and they were, you know what? It's just prototyping is an expensive process. Just deal with it.
And hey, any that weren't drafted to the rocket program got, stuffed into a flak tower and got microwaved by a 500-pounder. Who knows?
By time this podcast episode is going to be like 50% alliterative ways of describing Nazis being murdered, and I'm entirely here for it.
Welcome to literally show I'm ever on.
Hey, listen, at the end of the day, you have to give it to the Nazis. They were very good at killing Nazis.
Are you trying to set us up for a you do not have to hand it to the Nazis? We have to establish our own things and not just steal from like LLBD memes at this point.
I don't even think that's lines on my donkey thing. They were just...
let's be real here. Like, I think that's a pretty... If you're paying attention when you start getting into granular detail about anything they ever did, it like, not only does it put to rest the myth of German efficiency and good engineering, but also you come up with these same anecdotes. Like, it seems as though the people who wound up, receiving the blunt end of this Nazi, with notable exceptions, were also the Nazis. Like it's just, it happens to, especially when like some kind of new technology research is taking place. Like it seems to happen over and over again. Like I said, with notable exceptions, obviously like the people they persecuted is just like, that's not really the subject of jokes. But when it came to their own, like, we're going to win the war with this doodad, it always seems to just kill everyone involved.
Then you throw your best pilots at it, find out, hey, we're using fuel that will melt you when this extremely brittle ceramic pipe cracks.
But it was all for science. I'm just picturing Eugen and Irene standing in lab coats next to this fighter, like taking notes diligently as inside the canopy a dude is like screaming to get out. You're just like, all right, change the mix a little bit.
Pour them out, get the next one.
It's just very funny because I just keep imagining this sort of like power couple that really sucks at their job. And I know this is a super like niche reference, but all I can think of is Annabelle Janklow and Rocky Morton, who are the co-directors of the 1993 Super Mario Brothers movie, where Dennis Hopper is Bowser and Bob Hoskins, the Cockney actor, is Mario. And apparently Bob Hoskins was like, this is the worst fucking movie I've ever done, and they were the worst directors I've ever encountered. But like, if you look at like their CV or their filmography, they did a lot of work together. And it's just sort of like, that's all I can think of is like the power couple. Everyone hates them and they suck, and they keep getting hired over and over again.
You have the phenomena of self-reinforcing bullshit. It's like a tower building itself.
Part of it is also just like the intimidation and charisma of like, you now have two people telling you, no, this is how we have to do it.
I mean, this is the stuff of LinkedIn posts, honestly. Like if these people can do it and they can bullshit people into giving them job after job after job, like where their failures end in like spectacular explosions that aren't supposed to happen, like that anyone can bullshit their way to success. Anyone can hustle their way to grind set Valhalla.
I've been workshopping this thought like this entire time, and it's just like the couple that incinerates German youth together stays together, you know, like
there it is. We're slightly out of pocket now.
All right, our first, you've heard it here first, listeners. Our first merch is going to be like a live, laugh, love, live, laugh, melt. I don't know. We're workshopping it.
We're not doing live, laugh, melt. That's beyond the pale.
Yeah, I mean, a V2 rocket with the German equivalent of Gaslight, Gatekeep, Girl Boss written on it, and like that fucking scary Gothic font they always use in the Nazi era. Like that would either be very funny or people would just think you're a Nazi. Unfortunately, that's the line you kind of have to tread.
I'm unironically going to ask an artist friend to draw that. But yeah, like to kind of circle back to Kayser, you mentioned, Chris, that like, oh yeah, it does make sense. This program is flawed. He has good criticisms of it, and West Germany pulls out. Kayser also convinced Germany to leave the space shuttle program because he was convinced that it would fail completely.
I wonder what gave him that idea.
Well, that's an interesting one, because when you think about the fact that like the Soviet space shuttle was also successful. I mean, it was successful eventually, but by the time that, it got developed, they were running out of money, and then the Soviet Union collapsed. But like, it was prototyped out and executed by two separate space agencies and was successful. It's weird. I guess it's sort of like, opposite day syndrome, that if everything you've ever been involved in has just been a fucking failure and that somehow managed to create success, then like maybe, I don't know, you would think he would have said, hey, this is going to fail, but also I want to be involved. Like, but everything he says is wrong. He's like, it's like, I know there's some mythical thing here, you know what I mean? Like some sort of some reference, but like, yeah, it's just, you have to do the opposite of whatever he says at all times. And apparently,
I wonder then maybe that's what Eugen actually taught him, is the Kayser, like from his mentor, he learned what failure looks like. And he just learned like, oh, this is something my mentor would do. I'm leaving.
Bye-bye.
We can't do this. I didn't know, certainly, that West Germany was supposed to be a major partner in the space shuttle program.
Wait,
and
really?
Oh. Yeah. They were supposed to be a big part of it. Kayser convinced them to leave because he thought it was never going to fly. And while he did have some actual good criticisms of the shuttle, the end result of all of this is that West Germany pulls out completely and doesn't have a space program anymore.
They might have pulled out the space program, but NASA still has some pretty deep ties to German industry, even in experimental form. Like the one that comes to mind is the X-31, and that's Rockwell, Messerschmitt, and then one of those, absolutely psychotic German design houses for fighter planes that decided, I don't know, we're going to make a rocket-propelled Delta Wing fighter.
That is NASA providing, in the same way that NASA did the same thing with a lot of Roscosmos stuff after the fall of the Soviet Union, that is NASA providing life support to those German rocket companies, because the West German government has no money for them, has no projects for them. They need to do something. So NASA goes to them and kind of just says like, all right, we'll let you do this thing because we don't want you firing your scientists, and they go and work for Muammar Gaddafi.
Gotcha.
And finally, here's where we get to what really made Lutz Kayser famous. Kayser, whatever, sue me. After following his advice a bunch of times, the West German government suddenly found itself without a space program and completely removed from any international projects. While some can argue that Kayser made good points about the flaws in both the Europa and shuttle programs, I personally think that it's better to be involved in some kind of space project, even if it's not perfect. Anyway, Germany pulling out of all these space projects kicked off another wave of brain drain, as engineers and scientists started following their dreams to the US, France, or even East Germany. So East Germany didn't really have a launch industry at the time, but they were big contributors to Soviet collaborative Warsaw Pact programs like Intercosmos and Bion. As part of this, the first German cosmonaut flew in 1978, and the first German astronaut from West Germany only flew 5 years later. Anyway, to solve their problem and basically buy their way back into the space race, in 1971, the German government awarded 4 contracts to German aerospace companies to develop the Europa 3B as a successor to the failed Europa rockets. The 4 companies in question were Erno, Dornier, MAN, and TF, Kayser's startup, and they all got around 250,000 marks for research money. Like any good salesman, even though he put Germany in that position, Kayser also offered the solution. While the other companies worked on a more conservative rocket that would eventually become the modern Ariane, Kayser presented the government with his grand scheme to cut development and launch costs by 75%. He didn't need a big rocket. He would just bolt hundreds and thousands of little rockets together.
The bundle rocket.
It's Black Cat engineering. It's all of the fireworks I used to play with as a kid.
The only thing I'm left to think of when you say the phrase "a bunch of little rockets connected together" is that the Chinese guy that didn't exist that strapped all the rockets to the front and blasted himself up.
No, I'm blanking on his name, but yeah, the mythical dude who tried to launch himself to space with a rocket chair.
Exploding himself into a fine pink mist on the pad. The smoke clears. He's gone. He has landed
Mythically,
to the moon.
because he did not exist, probably. But yeah, it does kind of remind you of that.
Wan Hu.
I was wrong.
Yeah. Oh, you were? Okay. I heard you say Wuhan, and I was immediately just like, I'm going to cut that. I'm going to cut that.
Okay, that's just I flipped everything. I realized, yeah, I did say that.
But yeah. Kayser's idea was what he called the Bundelrocket, whatever, which I am definitely mispronouncing, literally meaning bundle or cluster rocket. The idea is pretty simple. You build a single small rocket core, and then that becomes your main building block. That's your Lego. If you want to launch bigger payloads or send them further, it all becomes an equation of how many of these small rockets you bundle together. To give you a sense of scale, the first stage of Kayser's planned Ariane competitor would be made from 6 bundles of 36 rockets each, for a grand total of 216.
I just love having 216 points of failure.
So it's just build a lot of really big pencil-shaped rockets and then cram them all together.
I have to say, one of the worst aerodynamic nose cones I've ever seen.
All I can think of is he just kind of looks like Ray Winstone in Sexy Beast. It's
I was
weird.
Saying, he also has a slight dollar store Elon Musk vibe going on right now.
Yeah, there's that. If Elon Musk was really into Duran Duran.
He had a bad phase.
You've got a similar kind of thing of like, all right, starting a rocket company with money earned by incredibly wealthy father. There's a whole bunch of other comparisons you can make along the way.
I have to stop looking at this picture because the more I look at it, the more confused I'm getting.
Yeah.
Now, Kayser was not the first to come up with this concept. It had actually been floating around since the 1920s when it was first conceived by a dude named J. Winkler. During World War II, Wolfgang Pils tried to revive the concept as a weapon at Peenemünde, and it was through Pils that Kayser had found the idea and gotten pilled on it. So he wasn't the first, but he was the first to realize what the concept meant for commercialization. Because every bundle rocket booster is made of a bunch of the same rockets, it makes manufacturing a breeze. You don't need to worry about specialized parts or anything like that, or even making new designs. You can just keep building more and more modular rockets.
You can assembly line it instead of bespoke rockets.
Kayser also updated the concept to make it as simple as humanly possible. Quote, each building block unit was an assemblage of off-the-shelf parts, few of which had ever been designed for spaceflight. The body of the rocket was industrial pipeline. The engine ball valves were stock items commonly found in chemical plants, and the valve inlets would be controlled by Volkswagen windshield wiper motors. The propellants, kerosene and white fuming nitric acid, would be fed into the engines not by means of the usual turbopumps, which were expensive, but by the so-called blowdown method, which was simplicity itself. Compressed air inside the fuel tank kept the propellant flowing out, just like in an aerosol can. It was about as basic as a rocket could be and still work.
Oh, God.
It didn't work. I want to give him some limited fairness. This is not an inherently stupid idea, and it does have some benefits. So, like we talked about, it's cheap. It allows you to easily scale your rockets to whatever size you need. If you want a custom build, it's just a matter of collecting however many rockets, where a normal rocket company would have to spend years like developing an entirely new booster. And for this rocket that he's designing, like on top of all of that, it also does have some benefits in reliability, because when your rocket has 216 engines, you can afford to lose a few and still make it to orbit. The downside, of course, is that you now have 216 engines that can fail. Another problem was the oxidizer he picked. Listeners of the show will probably have perked up when they heard me say the words white fuming nitric acid. So this stuff is the meaner cousin of red fuming nitric acid. The difference is that red acid is 86% pure and white is 95% pure. So this is like the meanest, most hypergolic fuel known to man. It is incredibly hard to work with. It will melt flesh. It will explode in contact with flesh. it will explode if there's like a tiny imperfection in the rocket fuel tank, and the rocket fuel tank is off the shelf industrial piping that Kayser found around Germany. So it's going to be like imperfect as hell.
So any kind of metallic inclusion is going to turn this thing into a pipe bomb at 210.
If there is the tiniest bit of rust on the inside, the oxidizer will react with it and detonate, and then it'll detonate every other of the 215 rockets bolted to it.
Detonation, here you come.
Anyway, through all this time, Kayser was living large on his West German seed money, drawing up plans for bigger and bigger bundle rockets, and most importantly, starting a media blitz so everyone knew what the new rocket sensation would be. Quote, Kayser had particular fondness for criticizing NASA approaches to space hardware. Did you know, he'd ask visitors, that NASA allocated about $500,000 just to develop a ballpoint pen for the Apollo missions that would work under conditions of weightlessness when, after all, an ordinary pencil would have done the trick just as well?
Don't open up that. Do not open up that can of worms on this show, please, right now.
So for anyone who is aware, Kayser here is word for word repeating the incredibly dumb space pen, space pencil legend that is often used to like criticize NASA. It normally goes something like, NASA spent all this money making a space pen. The Soviets launched a pencil. Just to like show efficiency or whatever, when the actual truth is that the Soviet space pencil sent graphite shavings into equipment in people's lungs, and they just wound up buying pens from NASA.
Also, I think one of the logical counterpoint to the Soviet, let's move quickly, no matter what, progress above all else argument is like, there's this sheer charnel house of like their early roster of cosmonauts. Like basically so many people died. Oh yeah. Like I remember there was one in particular, like, oh yeah, at least we retrieved remains of these guys. So we could bury them. And it looked like moon rocks. These people were so incinerated. And you're just like, yeah, I mean, NASA did have to, at least they may have started later and moved slower, but also like they got far fewer people killed in space. I'm just saying. And like, that's not to disparage the Soviets' accomplishments, because there were things they did that were completely groundbreaking in this field. But like the degree to which it was just like, yes, they've successfully walked into space. We haven't thought about re-entry. Figure it out, comrade.
We did cover, I think, the image you're talking about, where it's three guys in suits standing around what looks like a charcoal briquette in a coffin.
Yes.
And that one,
Omarov.
Yeah, that particularly hurt, because the dude honestly mathed his way most of the way out of that situation, got his re-entry angles right, everything correct, and then the systems just started failing.
Now, unfortunately for Kayser, his fame and his support did not last. In 1975, West Germany became a founding member of the new European Space Agency, or ESA. Because they were now helping with the International Ariane space program, the Germans canceled the Europa 3B project, effectively cutting Kayser off from any funding. Now, before anyone feels too sad for him or thinks they screwed him over, the ESA gave Kayser ample opportunity to work with them, and he turned them down because he thought they weren't revolutionary enough. Instead, he took his idea and tried something new. He would make the world's first private launch company. And this is something that's common now, but it had actually never been done before this point. He founded OTRAG, which stands for Orbital Transport und Raketen AG, and set about recruiting as many other like-minded scientists as possible. These guys, like Frank Wukash and Wolfgang Pils, formed the core of the company, while Kayser would, of course, serve as CEO and be entitled to 5% of all profits. To attract investors, he basically went the Theranos route and convinced a bunch of space celebrities to lend their credibility to his project and just take on like ceremonial roles. For example, Wernher von Braun signed on as an advisor, and while this can be a real job, it was ceremonial for him because Kayser just ignored all of von Braun's advice. I hate him because he was, at best a Nazi enabler, but like the dude knew rockets, and Kayser fully just told him like, no, I know better than you.
God.
I have no response. There's just a pained grinding.
Their biggest accomplishment, though, was getting former director of Kennedy Space Center and former officer in the goddamn SS, Kurt Debus, on as a chairman of the board. So there's a whole bunch of Nazis that get signed on, but I want to take the time to talk about Debus just because of how much effort he actually put into OTRAG. He was not ceremonial. He was involved in this project.
He was deep at all times.
Yeah. And I know that people might be saying that von Braun was also a member of SS, more so than any other scientist, even more so than Eugen. Kurt Debus was a diehard Nazi. He joined the SS around the same time as von Braun in 1940, but he had been a member of the SA since 1933. He was a brown shirt and a street fighter.
Ah, good credentials. Yeah, total fucking piece of work.
Exactly the guy. Yeah, the guy with CTE is who I want running NASA.
Dude's been hitting a brick every day for 3 years, and you just want to drag him into this program. Congratulations. Here's your own department.
To give you an idea, like when other German scientists working on the V2 were terrified of being denounced to the Gestapo, Kurt was the guy doing the denouncing. From the book Operation Paperclip, quote, Debus was an ardent Nazi. He had been an active SS member who, according to the testimony of colleagues, wore his Nazi uniform to work. Most troublesome was the revelation in his security report that during the war he had turned a colleague, an engineering supervisor named Richard Kramer, over to the Gestapo for making an anti-Nazi remark and for refusing to give Debus the Nazi salute. Kramer got 2 years hard labor for this.
Nice. That's real content and character right there. As if, him being part of the SA for that long wasn't already indication of.
Kurt was a dedicated Nazi his entire life. He was a dedicated Nazi while he was the head of the Kennedy Space Center.
Fuck's sake.
He continued to have these beliefs all through his life right up until his death. Never got any comeuppance for any of it.
Fucking paper.
I'm mad now. Anyway.
Let's just look the other way. Also, don't ever look into West German state security agencies.
Yeah, because nothing bad ever happened there either. No, sir.
Yeah. I don't want to derail the episode any further, but right. Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, I see. Denazification went very well. Was very thorough. We meant it.
I'm picturing like the West and East German militaries immediately adding allowing mustaches and beards to be grown for their soldiers, of just like, well, yeah, a bunch of dudes want to wear like Groucho Marx glasses now, so I guess we just have to allow this. Anyway, Kayser was able to leverage his team's experience and his patrons' credibility into enough funding to get OTRAG off the ground. The only problem was finding a launch site. European countries were off the list for a couple of reasons. They were too far north, their governments didn't want to cooperate, and paying their workers was expensive. The whole point of OTRAG was to cut down on launch costs, and Kayser believed in doing that at every stage of the company, not just the rocket. Through 1975 and 76, he sent teams around the world to negotiate for launch sites. When picking countries, Kayser had a few factors that he thought were critical to making his operation as efficient as possible. First, the country had to be near the equator. This is because it's just easier to launch rockets from the equator. You get a bigger boost from the Earth's rotation, and you can easily launch north or south. It's why American launch sites are in Florida and California, and why the ESA launches from French Guiana. Second, it had to be a dictatorship. Kayser hated red tape and figured, like most rogue space engineers, that working with a dictator is an easy way around laws and regulations. Third, the poorer the country, the better. A poor country means poor workers, and poor workers don't need to be paid as much, keeping the overall operational costs down. This is not just me editorializing. This is what is written into the OTRAG reports looking for sites. After years of negotiating with Brazil, Uganda, and Singapore, Kayser finally found the perfect location for his launch site, the Republic of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So the dude literally, he didn't say the quiet part out loud, he formalized it, put it in reports.
Yes, this was going to investors. He was telling investors, like, yeah, I'm going to keep launch costs down because all these people, they don't need money. So on top of all of the other factors, Zaire offered a solution to OTRAG's regulatory problems. Quote, several complicating factors kept OTRAG from setting up base in Germany. The first is the United States Space Treaty, which specifies that all rockets fired in international airspace must bear the insignia of the country of origin. This means that any individual or private firm needs the sponsorship of a government to fire rockets. But at the same time, there is the 1954 Treaty of Brussels, which places limits on German rearmament by prohibiting the manufacture of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. It also forbids the production of long-range missiles and guided missiles on German territory. Zaire, on the other hand, had no qualms about letting OTRAG use Zairean insignia on its rockets and permitted OTRAG to develop its rockets without limitations. So this is basically like a way of getting around any of the restrictions placed on Germany after World War II, because Zaire, they'll just allow anything. Now, while I am definitely not an expert on Congolese history, I think a bit of background would go a long way to help people understand why this impoverished country in Central Africa was Lutz Kayser's first choice for a spaceport. The Republic of Zaire in the 70s was run by its fantastically corrupt dictator, Mobutu Sese Seko, as a kleptocracy where all of the nation's wealth was funneled into the pockets of Mobutu and his closest confidants. He was able to stay in power and keep his country barely together by playing off basically every side of the Cold War against each other expertly. When Mobutu took over in a coup in 1965, he did it with support from the US and Belgium, who thought his predecessor was too close to the Soviets. Later, France joined in supporting him because he was seen as a strong anti-communist. Somehow, this arrangement didn't change when Mobutu started accepting a large amount of aid from Mao's China. Similarly, despite doing everything in his power to rid Zaire of colonial influence, he maintained good relationships with Rhodesia and South Africa until it was convenient to disavow them. Just about the only thing that this man was consistent in was loving money and hating the Soviets.
Oh, God.
But he's good at it. He's able to stay in power for so long by just perfectly, like, the best way to look at him, I think, is like, and again, no expert here, is as a chameleon. Because he is able to talk to all these different groups, play them off of each other, and, get them to at least marginally support him.
Honestly, it was both for health reasons and just like political instability. I think eventually that he was left power. But I mean, really the only reason why he left power is because he died. I mean, he went into exile like very soon before he died, but like his reign outlasted the Cold War. Like he died in 1997, but it's interesting. Like, yeah, when you think about some of the people who were, sort of useful to Western countries or to NATO countries, et cetera, like in the First World versus the Second World kind of conflict in the Cold War, most of them either something bad happened to them or the sort of political winds changed. And it's just interesting. Yeah, I would not want to have lived in Zaire, and it sounds like the degree of oppression people experienced there was unbelievable. Like you said, he was like ultra Marcos in terms of corruption, but it is wild the degree to which, like, yeah, he was, I would say, that one of the chief beneficiaries of being able to leverage the kind of like non-aligned. I don't know if Zaire was a member of the non-aligned movement, but like that same kind of mentality, you know what I mean? The sort of like,
or at the very least being non-aligned in the sense that he was on a lot of sides. He wasn't just completely neutral. Like, he was on the West side, he was on China's side. The only side that he wasn't on was the Soviet side.
Honestly, after a certain point of history, you could even say that's pretty close to what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it, and when you think about some of the people who were able to, kind of walk that line, and if I remember correctly, like my figures here might be kind of fuzzy, but I recall that he had been leaving the country for cancer treatment, and there was a lot of instability because of what happened during the Rwandan genocide, because Zaire is so large that Kinshasa is, I remember correctly, Kinshasa is basically on the Atlantic. It may be like on the Congo River as it enters the Atlantic, but there are areas, like, what is it, North and South Kivu, I think, they're in Africa's Great Lakes, where like they share a border with Rwanda. It's a huge country.
Oh, okay.
And and so but it wasn't until like 96 or 97 like that there was I think that he wound up being overthrown. But like, compare that to anyone else. I mentioned Marcos. You think about people like Hissène Habré in Chad, or was it Suharto in Indonesia, or I mean, name any Cold War non-aligned dictator. I mean, Abdel Gamal Nasser, like lots of people on these lines. So Mobutu managed to stay in power very, very long, and I mean, some of that is the, like you said, the total absolute controls. A lot of the absurd mineral wealth of Zaire, now the DRC. But then, like you said, like this was an area that both sort of great power groups during the Cold War were very active in. And he, like you said, he had his one great interest was, well, he hated the Soviets and he really loved money. And there was money to be made, and there were lots of people who wanted the right to make money in Zaire. And anyway, definitely don't look into what Mobutu. Okay, I cannot fucking believe I'm saying this. To be fair to Mobutu Sese Seko, it's not as if Zaire was in great shape when he took power in the 60s, given what it was in the Congo state with Belgian Congo, immediately after independence, or the fact that at this point, like, the CIA and NATO governments are not openly saying, like, we we killed literally everybody who was involved in trying to make that country less despotic, but then also it was the Congo Free State. So if you know anything about the history of the Congo Free State, how it was established, what it was like Zaire, the DRC has caught a raw deal since time immemorial, and particularly since the late 19th century. But there are other countries that were similarly badly treated, and maybe not to so great an extent, but similarly badly treated in sub-Saharan Africa by European colonial powers, and that didn't have a Mobutu in power, and they're better off because holy shit, man, the DRC is like, it's a very, very sad situation. I don't want to make a joke about it, but like it is, in terms of like quality of life metrics, it's like the worst in the world.
Yeah. A part of this, and this is, obviously still felt in the country today, is just how like incredibly corrupt Mobutu Sese Seko was. Like, even compared to the baseline of Cold War era African dictator who took over in a coup, like if you look at the wealth of the country compared to the level of corruption, he is probably like he's one of the most corrupt people on the planet. It's estimated that he embezzled at least $4 billion, and he was not quiet about his wealth either. So something he was particularly famous for was renting the Concorde so he could fly to Paris and go shopping. Quote, he built the runway in a village called Gbadolite, a remote outpost in Zaire. Mobutu was born here and gorged on billions of dollars of his nation's wealth from natural resources and foreign aid. He returned to Gbadolite to build a 3,200-meter-long runway in a mud hut village that had no roads. He also built a palace, a hydroelectric dam, and a Coca-Cola bottling plant. So something else, and this ties in with OTRAG, something else that he loved to do was to bring stuff to Zaire, to get celebrities to come visit him, to bring the Concorde there, to bring all of this cool, flashy stuff. There's a famous boxing match, the Rumble in the Jungle match between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Mm-hmm. That happens in Kinshasa because Mobutu pays for this to come. They pay for all these people to come out and fight and to advertise himself and Zaire. This is also where Kayser comes in. He and Mobutu were first introduced by a guy named Fred Weimar, an international financier working for OTRAG, and by all accounts, they hit it off pretty much instantly. Mobutu wanted OTRAG's business for two reasons. First, because there was a lot of money to be made in the space industry, and OTRAG had agreed to give Mobutu a personal cut of every launch. And second, because of the attention and publicity that Mobutu could get out of building, in his words, the first Cape Kennedy in Africa. OTRAG had spent years negotiating with various governments to take his launch site. Mobutu agreed after only 6 days of talking. And I know that I have said this repeatedly about how things get dumber. This is probably my favorite space history fact. So in 1976, OTRAG signed a lease for a 140,000 square kilometer or 50,000 square mile chunk of Shaba province, what is now Haute-Katanga and Tanganyika. For context, that is more than 6% of Zaire's landmass. It's the size of Wisconsin and it's bigger than Greece, all handed over to OTRAG to be Kayser's personal corporate playground.
Yeah, it's the Congo Free State in miniature, but for rockets.
It's the rocket state. Oh, it's the sovereign state of SpaceX.
To do a quick aside, I know you're going to do a jumping off point. Do you guys know the whole justification behind the Congo Free State? You know that whole story?
Enlighten me.
Okay. So King Leopold the Second of Belgium, one of the hugest pieces of shit
of his era. All you had to do was say Belgium and piece of shit, and you kind of covered bases.
Yeah, amazing. A Belgian who's a piece of shit. Unbelievable. He effectively used European sensitivities towards what he called sort of the slave trade, particularly in East Africa, as a justification, saying that they needed to have a colonial state that wasn't actually a colony so much as that it was a free state that could guarantee that the slave trade would be wiped out. But they basically strong-armed. What actually happened was Belgian Asians strong-armed and just flat out murdered any people like tribal leaders, local authorities who wouldn't cooperate, and this massive land grab that created the borders of modern day DRC. And the Congo Free State was like just a one big slave prison for rubber. Like, was just so unbelievably brutal that, like, the anecdote that often gets kicked around is that the Congo, the CFS authorities basically had the right to kill anyone for shirking if they wanted to. And so they had quotas that people who were being treated as slaves had to meet for fulfilling rubber. And one of the punishments for not fulfilling your quota was that they just cut your hand off. and the hands would then be smoked and then preserved to be taken to the authorities to prove like, hey, these people were punished. And so one of the results of this was that like the hands had value because they like, you know, got you off the hook for not meeting your quota. You'd punish the people who failed. They kind of became like an unofficial scrip currency in the colony. People hoarded hands and just abducted, just grabbed people and cut their hands off so they could basically use them and trade them for. I mean, it's so unreal. And there's a book called King Leopold's Ghost that's unbelievably detailed in this, and it's pretty grim reading. But amazingly, one of the people who kind of caught wind of this and led to the investigation as to what happened, that then shamed Belgium so much into changing it into a different kind of colony, was a British guy who was, I believe he was like a shipping clerk in when London had a major port. And he noticed that the only thing, despite all of the humanitarian promises and development promises and all the shit in the news that the Belgians were saying, the only thing that ever seemed to come out of boats coming out of the Congo Free State was, remember, like gold and rubber. And the only thing going in there was guns and chains. And I'm not exaggerating. They were just importing chains and guns and ammo and exporting, rubber and gold. And it was so shockingly horrific that even by late 19th century standards, they were like, this is too much of a fucking outrage. You Belgians have gone too far. So yeah, I mean, that's the Congo. That's the Congo Free State, which is then the Republic of the I can't remember the official name that the Belgians had for the Congo, that then became the Independent Republic of the Congo in 1960, 61. And then a few years later, Mobutu took over and was a dictator until 97. So yeah, that's my potted history. But that's just a little bit of context of this place. It's like
continually, just a nation dealt in incredibly poor hands.
I'm going to continue to blame the Dutch after, or not the Dutch, the Belgians after this. The Dutch have plenty of other smoke to catch, but the Belgians.
The Dutch. I was going to say there's this country right along the equator and in Asia that probably must have a word with the Dutch. But what I was going to say is that, like, so the notion of hey, they by hook or by crook, they've somehow managed to grant this European his own personal fiefdom in this part of Central Africa. Yes. Like, that is just the Congo Free State, but now in the 70s, and they're building a space launch pad there.
They have managed to recreate that horrific system in a different fashion.
Man, that's incredibly fucked up, I guess, is my takeaway from this, because
it's genuinely that bad. So it's like, it is also like kind of funny. Let's be honest here, that like idiot Rocket Failson manages to get this, but the place that he gets it basically recreates Heart of Darkness, or the origin story of Heart of Darkness. But also, it's
the rocket rush for Africa in all of the worst ways.
If it makes you feel any better, a lot of these ex-Nazi scientists are going to die down here.
Hopefully they get executed by street gangs, but that's my own. That's my own.
Or malaria. There was a Vice documentary about a guy who was trying to find like the last land races of weed that hadn't been fucking crossbred by weed growers, and he was traveling all over the Democratic Republic of Congo trying to find it. And then people were kind of mad at him. They're like, "We should get money for this. Like, you're just taking seeds from our communities, then we're not going to get anything." And he's like, "No, I promise I'll compensate you." And then he died from malaria.
Hell yeah.
So I'm just saying, it's a climate, as well as all the political instability and issues. There's a climate that kind of fucks with Europeans. It's kind of in fairness, it also fucks with people who are from there, because like stuff like malaria and river blindness kill lots of Congolese people. But it's not exactly a place where it's like, hey, I'm going on a tropical working holiday.
No.
To Katanga province, DRC. It's like,
Yeah, and we'll talk about this in part 2 whenever we get there, but they also pick like literally the worst place to put their rocket site. Now, Kayser argued that renting such a huge area was necessary to make sure that spent rockets wouldn't fall on any towns or cities. This is basically the method the Soviets used and China pretends to use today. But where Baikonur, Kazakhstan was an empty desert hellscape, the area that OTRAG rented had a population of well over 100,000 people. So it's definitely not the most densely populated part of Zaire, but like it's still a lot. Not to mention, the first stage would fall within this area. The second stages, they would go over the border and crash in neighboring Tanzania. And Tanzania's capital was on the flight path and like under the gun.
That can't cause problems later. No siree.
So Kayser has people in his like rocket landing site, but he has a solution. He'll just deport every single one of them. And because of the incredibly wide-ranging powers Mobutu gave him, he could legally do this.
So he's basically doing NEOM. It's the Congo Free State and NEOM all wrapped into one.
The most literal, the CEO is your president. Die.
The contract that OTRAG and Zaire signed gave the company a truly stupid amount of power over Shaba province and effectively turned it into a corporate state. How we know about this is that Caltech's Stanley Cohn was able to acquire an unabridged copy of the contract and translate it to English, which is what I'll be using here. The contract starts off pretty simple. It describes the area that OTRAG would be taking ownership of and gives them the right to build anything they need to service and launch their rockets. Then things get a little weird. Quote, Article 2 gives OTRAG the right to take all steps it may deem necessary in exercising the entire use of the territory, so long as these shall not interfere with the country's security. Expressly, it gives OTRAG the right to use any access to the land to transport anything needed without special permission. The territory is also deemed duty-free, and all OTRAG employees and their families are exempt from taxes and are granted diplomatic immunity. OTRAG is granted exclusive right over the airspace over the property and all rights of landing in it. Article 3 gives OTRAG the right to decide which people will be permitted on the property. The corporation can request and obtain evacuation of any non-OTRAG personnel from the premises at any time. OTRAG is also given the right to have special protection from Zaire for any persons or facilities in order to ensure security. No type of observation through photography or otherwise may be done without OTRAG's direct permission. So, taken all together, the contract gave OTRAG dictatorial control over Shaba province. The Germans were made exempt from Congolese law and were given the authority to establish their own rules, regulations, and judicial system, which they did. And you mentioned before, Nate, that how much of the DRC's wealth that has been extracted by dictators and colonialism is due to natural resources. OTRAG also got access to all of Shaba's natural resources. Kayser had plans on top of his rockets that he was just going to open a bunch of uranium mines because this area is full of it.
Yeah.
In exchange, OTRAG would pay an annual fee of $25 million, though with the first payment deferred to 1980, and give Mobutu a 5% cut of all revenue. Not Zaire, just Seko personally. Now, while this might not sound like a lot to interest one of the world's richest dictators, Kayser had a business strategy that was expected to make OTRAG billions. He'd sell to literally anybody if they had cash, or in his own words, quote, OTRAG will launch reconnaissance satellites and Earth resources satellites and others too dangerous and politically sensitive for shuttle launch. He's just going to kowtow to every dictator he can find.
Yeah, you literally hand him a black box and say, throw this into orbit, please. Thank you.
Now, the launch industry in 1976 was very different than what it is today, not just in terms of private and government rockets, but also in terms of who was doing the launching. By then, a few nations like the UK, France, and Japan had managed to put their own satellites in orbit, but the only nations regularly launching anything, or in bulk, were the United States and the Soviet Union. So China had launched their first satellite in 1970, and they were making progress toward a series of spy satellites, but they were still in the research stage. They weren't launching commercial satellites. Both the Americans and the Soviets were in the business of selling their rockets, but only to their allies. So, for example, Canada's first satellite launched on an American rocket. India's first satellite launched on a Soviet rocket. Taken all together, what this means is that the only way to launch a satellite back then was to pick a side in the Cold War or sink billions into your own space program. So when Lutz Kayser rolled up and said that he'd launch anyone's satellite for a few $1 million, he actually got a lot of interest. Quote, OTRAG already had customers waiting for the launch system if it turned out to be viable. The Arab League wanted to purchase the first OTRAG launcher to orbit the Arcomsat, or Arab Communications Satellite. Negotiations were underway with many third world nations for the launching of telecom satellites. According to Kayser, 5 states in South America, Africa, and East Asia showed interest. Now, you will be happy to know that there was one notable exception. OTRAG vowed that they would never do any business with apartheid South Africa. But before you give Lutz Kayser too much credit, he did not make this decision out of any kind of personal moral problems. It was advertising. When asked why, he said, quote, "We would not carry something for South Africa. That would be bad management. We would lose 20 customers to get that one." He's right for the wrong reasons.
Gotcha. He's still a shitheel.
And he's willing to work with literally anybody else. The only reason he doesn't want to work with South Africa is because they have an unusual amount of bad press around them.
What could that be?
So, South Africa aside, Kayser's idea was basically to pander to the world's dictators and anyone too crazy for the Americans or Soviets to do business with. But before any of that could happen, OTRAG needed a spaceport. And that is where we are going to call it for part 1. So be sure, listeners, to listen in for part 2, where we will be talking about Cape Kennedy, the launch tests there, and Muammar Gaddafi. So, everybody, how do you feel?
I am excited for Chaos Agent number 1 to finally join the fray.
I just feel like I've been blasted by white fuming nitric acid, just...
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I didn't realize that Gaddafi got involved. So this really does seem like it's going to be, one of the end credits, after credits scene of a Marvel movie, and all the famous names are showing up, except it's famous shitheads from the Cold War.
You just see him walking to scene with his pen arrow, just get up, just in full view.
And I don't want to spoil a whole lot, but yeah, for part 2, this is the story that involves so many people. I think I sent it to some of the Chris's, but I made a little movie trailer kind of like image of just all the different names involved. And it's like Mobutu Sese Seko, Muammar Gaddafi, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, dozens of ex-Nazis, like Werner von Braun.
Well, my mind is forming connections here, and you said for a couple $1 million they'll launch your satellite no matter who you are, unless you're South Africa. So now I'm thinking, what kind of fucking weird satellite did Muammar Gaddafi want to launch?
Oh my God.
That's what I'm staking it. I don't know. We haven't recorded episode 2 yet. We're not going to for like a week or something. So I don't know. But if I had put money on this, Gaddafi wants some kind, like he I don't know. He wants a satellite that's going to form a constellation to draw a picture of the Green Book anywhere in the world at night.
Condoleezza Rice, depending on how you view it.
he wants to launch the cock rocket from Austin Powers exclusively to hit the space shuttle and then get a picture of that.
That does sound on brand. Yeah, kind of like the way it used to be at the internet, the airport in Baghdad when Saddam was in power. There was a picture of George Bush that you had to step on, like, among other things. Yeah, so we'll find out. I'm excited though.
But yeah, Nate, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
On the off chance that anyone listening to this show does not already listen to your shows, is there anything you want to plug?
I produce I'm on 4 shows. One's called What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's a show about why you shouldn't join the military. It's also about gardening and being a dad. Lines Up by Donkeys is a podcast about military disasters, hosted by myself and Joe Kasabian, who does all the work. Trash Future is a podcast about the tech industry through its own words, incredibly stupid, self-regarding words, and also about British politics because we all live here. And Kill James Bond is a film review podcast about making fun of Bond movies, but now just every movie you can think of, hosted by 3 very funny trans people, all located here in the United Kingdom. So any of those shows interest you, they are available on all the sort of streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and then also all of them have Patreons for bonus content if you are interested.
And listener, come back in probably 2 weeks to listen to part 2, Muammar Gaddafi, Rockets, Cape Kennedy. We have it all.
Thank you for listening to Failure to Launch. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review or tell a friend. Everything helps. If you want to follow us, contact us, or suggest a topic, you can email us at launchfailurepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at launch_failure. Failure to Launch is hosted on Anchor, and we post on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. We also post our episodes with visual aids on YouTube at Failure to Launch. All music was provided by DJ Danarchy.